So I don't know about you, but I get a little bit shy in front of people. And especially when people talk, like say something nice about me, I feel like, yeah. But hopefully she did a great introduction, so you know a lot about me. So have you ever been to a workshop before and you come for a reason with like a really specific question you really need help with, and then they never get to it? Has that ever happened to anybody? She's nodding. Okay, so we're going to start this workshop with putting your questions into a discussion board. So we're going to have two questions. The first one is going to be what you already know about taxes, because that puts our best foot forward instead of feeling intimidated and scared. You can say, okay, hold on, I already know something about this. And then the second question is we're going to do, what do you want to know about taxes? So I'm going to invite you, and this might take a few minutes, I'm going to invite you to join an online discussion board. So you can take a picture of this QR code with your phone, if you can. And if you can't join us that way, you can write your question down, you can hand it over here to Nicole, and she'll put it up in our discussion board. This is what it looks like, and then it will add people's questions live, and we can participate back and forth. That way, if you're joining us on Zoom, if you're watching this a week from now, or if you're here at this workshop but you leave and you think of a question, you can get back on here and you can post your question.
I have the little strips of paper if they want to write their question down here, and then we can hand them to Nicole.
Great.
If that's helpful, if they don't want to do it on the phone.
Isabel, do you want a piece of paper to write down questions? Okay, and then Kate, do you want to write down questions? And if you're on Zoom and you can't get on there, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box. And Nicole will make sure they go on this discussion board. So this is our place. So if you think about it, you can put it here. And if you think about it later, you can put it here. I'll go back and check and try to answer your question. Yeah. And then as we're going throughout, hopefully we get all those questions answered. But if we don't, then we'll come back. Don't be worried that you left and you came for no reason. Fair? Okay. So this might take you a minute. Does everybody who wanted to, is anyone having issues opening this and getting so you can participate in the discussion? Anybody on Zoom or here that wants to participate in that discussion that's unable to? So while you're putting down your questions and adding them on the discussion board, I would like to start by, my goal is to help you feel empowered. And part of that for me that seems to help people is when I share some of my background. So I want to tell you where I came from, because I had that fabulous introduction, but here's what I want to show. This is where I come from. This is me right here in the middle. This is where I come from. So I am 5 years old and I'm not at a family picnic right here. I'm working with my siblings. I have 13 brothers and sisters. And by the time I was 5 years old, I was working in a sawmill. So my family, we had stuff, and then everything got pulled out from under us. The logging industry changed, our employees left, and we were the employees. We had this idea that if we worked really hard and persevered, we could overcome poverty, we could make it in life, we could get somewhere. But that didn't work out for us very well. A few years later, I was logging. By the time I was 8, I had a chainsaw. I was literally running a chainsaw by the time I was 8 years old.
You go.
Thank you. I'm a wimp now, just in case anybody wondered. But that's what I did to survive. Can you relate to that a little bit? Like, you're just like, if I just keep pushing and persevering, I'm going to make it. It's going to happen for me. It takes that, but it takes a little bit more. It takes a lot of help. It takes coming and getting knowledge, pulling apart from other people, right? That's what it's taken for me. In fact, this is what I come back to. This is what the whole theme of my story boils down to, is this idea that, I didn't even know my story was strange until about 3 years ago. I didn't even know that was weird. I thought everyone grows up with 13 siblings, logging and laboring in a sawmill. How could I grow up like that? How could that even happen? So I think what I did, and maybe you can relate to this, maybe you have a loved one with an addiction, or maybe there's something in your life that you're just like, maybe if I don't see it, I don't have to do anything about it. Because this is what it boiled down to for me is, to see demand responsibility. So by the time I was like, oh, wait a minute, that is abnormal, I have to do something about that. It was very, very hard for me because I'm going, oh my gosh, you know what that's going to involve? Like reinvestigating my whole life. What else is weird? What else do I need to know about? What else do I need to change? And how else do I need to grow as a parent, as a woman? Yes?
Not weird, different.
Different. Thank you. I like that term. I like that a lot. Thank you for helping me feel better about that. And especially for being naive to that. So because anybody else relate to that, you're just like thinking that, or you're putting up with something you really shouldn't be putting up with, you know? Because in that kind of environment, it wasn't just the fact that I was valued by what I could produce. And I still struggle with feeling like I have to produce things and stay busy to be valued, but also just this this cringing feeling knowing that I was not being treated the way that I needed to be. There was a lot of neglect. There was a lot of abuse. There's different things. But I didn't see any of that. Like I said, even until up till about 3 years ago. So I hope that you can see where I'm coming from. Another thing is like, I don't know, just being like invisible to people. This was me again a few years later, right before I was involved in a really serious accident. And I remember like just literally being covered with tree sap. You know how sometimes you get it on your hair or on your hand, it doesn't come out, except like you're like slathering on peanut butter or doing something. That was my life. That was 24/7 for me. Do you know how people treat you when you look like that? It's real. You know, you can relate to that. It's terrible. So I just wanted to share this with you and help you maybe understand where it come from and maybe be able to relate to this and feel, hopefully, because my big goal is that you leave feeling empowered. Like, hey, hang on, that chick can get you up there. If she did all this stuff, maybe that can work out for me. I just need to keep asking for what I want and keep seeking those people who will help me. So for me, that's come through education, through like trying to increase my knowledge. And like, what put my family here? Maybe like not an understanding of the language of business. So that's definitely why I studied accounting. Maybe, you know, not understanding how to work with the IRS. We had a lot of concerns with them. And Zonta was actually one of the organizations that gave me a scholarship to go back to school and get my degree in accounting. So this is for me, knowledge. Like today you're getting class, the reason you're here is, for me, it's been eye-opening, right? It helped me open my eyes to my journey and see different. Yeah, that's different. And then it's been very empowering for me, very valuable. So my goal today is to help you leave feeling very empowered, no matter if you're like, this is my first time doing taxes ever and I'm really confused, or if you've been doing this for a really long time, that you feel like I totally got this and I can do this, because that's how we help each other. And then this is really, really, really my goal in life and everything that I do. I love this quote by Madeleine Albright. Like, our saving grace does come in helping lift one another up. So hopefully today you can feel uplifted, and hopefully you can get the knowledge that you need and be surrounded. There's a lot of women. For a lot of my life, I didn't know very many of these women that actually want to help you move forward and feel that if they help you move forward, they're moving forward. And it's a totally selfless act, but now I know lots of them, and they're right here in this room. So to really, really get started, has everyone had a chance to go ahead and post their questions in that discussion board and kind of join that?
Want me to collect them?
Oh, did anyone write down questions they want to turn in right here? You can add them into the chat so I can answer those or read them. Okay. Let's walk through a little bit and see if it gets answered. And then if not, we may start pulling up those questions. Is that okay? You're like, good luck answering that, but we might find it. And if not, we'll come back to it. Anybody else did everyone get their questions? At least we have that space for them. Okay. So Nicole can put them in that space. So, and we're going to try to get through. So you should have received, we have this packet today. We have 3 papers. So we're going to actually, I learned hands-on. I learned, rather than somebody just telling me how it works, I learned like actually doing it. So the first thing we have is we have a few documents. We have this document called Priscilla Tax Return. So if you're on Zoom, if you're joining this, watching this in a week from now, or if you're here in person, you can access these in a couple of different ways. You can pull them up on your phone. You can just scan this and it will take you to a drive that holds all of these documents we're talking about. Or you can, the paper is here if you're in person. So the first thing we have is this Priscilla Prize practice tax return. And so what we're gonna do is I put the information, I just made this up, not a real person. So I put in all her information and then everything, like all the confusing information too, I didn't take it out. And then I went ahead and printed off a 1040. That's that next form. And this is the one we're gonna start on. So the idea is that we take all the information from this practice return and we use our pencil and we try to fill out a 1040 all by ourselves. Is anyone scared a little bit? You're not scared at all? Okay, somebody sit by her. She was something like she's gonna be helpful. Is anyone else like, okay, I'm good. I could do this. Uh-oh, I'm hearing some no's. Okay, so go ahead and open up if you're online, you can open up our drive and the 3 documents we're gonna be looking at are the Priscilla Price practice tax return, the IRS 1040.
So we feel.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah.
Based on this.
Yeah, not based on you. So we're gonna go ahead and do it based on this, okay? And then if you want to do it, we're gonna do it. This is more like we did one, now we can do our own. And if you need an extra at the end to do your own. So, okay, the first line that we start with on these is everybody able to open either the documents we're talking about, they have them on paper, or they're able to open the drive that has them. So this drive holds a few folders and then 3 forms at the bottom that say Priscilla Price practice tax return as a PDF and the IRS 1040. Those are the ones we're going to start opening and walking through.
So here you got the same.
Yes, you can do it on paper or you can do it on either board. Is everybody in the room?
I've given them moment. I have some questions from here.
Let's see if we get to them when we do our tax form, and then we'll come back and we'll see what we do.
It's not saying that if she's married.
It doesn't say, so we're gonna go ahead and say she's single. So you must be starting in the very beginning. By the way, I have to do a legal disclaimer, so there it is. I started working as a tax preparer about 10 years ago, and I worked for Liberty Tax for a while, and then I realized I'm like, I want to go out on my own and do this. So I started going out on my own and doing tax returns, and then I realized like, this isn't sustainable for me because all I want to do is teach everybody how to do it themselves. I do, because all you need to know is what applies to your specific situation is like this much. The tax code, yeah, can fill up the room and kill Superman, but you only need to know this much. You only need to know what applies to you. So that's why we're going to try to go through a tax return and see. So very first, this should come up right here. So what do we put? Very first section in this, we're going to assume she's single. It doesn't say she's single, but we're not seeing anything that says she doesn't. So we're going to go ahead and say she's single. If you have questions about filing statuses, this is kind of how it works. So if you're single, if you're unmarried, or if you're separated legally, you're married filing jointly, whether you live together or not, and you agree to file a joint return. If you don't agree, then that's going to be married filing separately. Any questions on these 3 statuses?
You did have a question from the room. Can you repeat the question because they won't be able to hear me now. So, about when is it better to file married separate versus married joint?
That is a really tough question. It's always better to file married filing jointly if you can, and if you trust your spouse. But because they really penalize you, there's you do married filing separately and you don't qualify for like half the credits.
It's a lot of friends the joint. And me with my husband, we weren't married, but we lived together, we had kids.
Yeah.
And we saw the difference.
Yes.
And we're losing so much, and we're like,
yeah, you saw the difference in doing married filing. Yeah.
It's like you can, or he can claim the kids, but just because you're not married or you don't file jointly, you lose a lot of credits.
So she's saying just because if you're not filing jointly, you lose out on a lot of benefits. So that's a really, yeah. So you can only file married filing jointly though if you are married, or you have a registered domestic partnership, and you agree to file a joint return. So you can't just say, I get more benefits, let me go ahead and do that. And then also, if you don't trust your spouse and what they're doing, because you have no idea, then you are liable for their tax. So even if you're losing out on the credits.
Now, if you're not married and it's your, so you live together, you have kids, but you're not married, can you still file jointly,
You can file it jointly if you are a registered domestic partnership.
or you have to be registered?
So this is kind of the guidelines, is you have to be either married or registered domestic partnership, or you and your spouse agree to file a return jointly. Or there's obviously, when you get into the legality of what's considered married, that's a different, maybe next class in the legal one. So, because there are situations where you're considered married, right?
In other states.
Yeah. In other states, like Oregon, I know it's, yeah.
Common law. So it's like if she's lived with, her significant other for more than 7 years, correct, like that's considered dating, if they're not in California.
So for California, yeah, so it's gonna be different state by state.
Oh, yeah.
And then-
It's true unless, like, Colorado, California.
Yeah, do you wanna?
The only time it makes sense to marry and filing separate is if you both make a lot of money. So if one of you makes 150,000, and that's whatever the tax bracket, let's say that's 50. When you add the second 150,000, you are now taxed at a higher tax bracket, let's say 30%. So you may lose some of the benefits, however, you are paying less tax and you get one, there's a chance of getting that. So it's just, you really have, my husband says, oh yeah, that's what my former wife and I did. We're not, we're financially.
Yeah, so I want to clarify on that. The United States focuses on, we have what's called a marginal tax system, so you don't pay, so everybody pays the same percentage on the first, like 10% on the first 12,000, or the rates go up as you make more, but it doesn't mean that if you make 300,000, all of it's taxed at 30% or 40%. Everybody's taxed the same amount on this amount, and then this amount, and then this amount. It's a progressive tax system. So it's not true that if you make 300,000, you're going to pay 40% in taxes on everything. I just want to clarify that. It's a margin, it's a progressive tax system. So everyone's going to pay the same 10% on this amount, and then 15% on this amount, and then as it goes forward. Yeah. Well, except if you're really rich and you're really smart, I mean, apparently they get out of everything, right? I don't know. That's just what I see. I just pay my taxes and go, why? But then I think, you know what? It's, yeah. At least I can, right? At least I can.
You have that problem.
At least I have a problem. So really, if you're not married, then you don't have to file. The first question is, are you married? And if you're not, then file a single. Single if you're not married, or if you're separated by divorce or divorce decree. So the marriage questions, are I married? That's a good question for the next workshop. But for me, for these purposes, you're single if you're unmarried. You're married filing jointly if you're married, or you can choose married filing separately. There's a few situations that might apply to some people. You might be able to file head of household if you're not married at the end of the year, if you pay more than half the cost to keep up the home and you have a dependent child or qualifying your own. You might qualify as that, so you don't have to do the married filing.
So only the head of household can have a qualifying child. It's called, it's dependent.
You have to have a dependent to be head of household.
Oh, you have.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So you do have to have a child to be able to say I'm head of household, because head of household means essentially I'm the head of household providing work. And then qualifying surviving spouse is called sometimes, so if your spouse died and you haven't remarried, then you can use this for 2 years, the spouse.
Cannot file to dependent spouse, even if it doesn't work.
Just so you can't, you want to claim your spouse. So some people do, they claim their spouse as a dependent. Or if they're your spouse, then you would not, you would be trying to file married filing jointly number.
Because if you file, so single, but you actually need to get a spouse and you're head of household, you can claim your husband as dependent.
If he's your husband, then you wouldn't be single, right? Or
I mean, your partner.
your partner. Okay. So really, filing status, just point out a good point is it boils down to, are you married? Okay, it boils down to that. And if you are married, choose one of these. If you're not married, then you can look at head of household. So if you're claiming somebody as a dependent, if you're claiming somebody you're living with as a dependent, You know, you really want to look at, well, how much income do they have and would it make more sense for them to claim themselves? You have to
No, but
really,
in case of, let's say, there's a lot of households, they're not married, they get together, they have kids. The wife is taking care of the kids, she's not working. But if she is filing jointly with him, he cannot claim her because she's together with him. But if they file, let's say the husband's the only one working, he's the only one bringing money, she doesn't work, and they're not married legally, so can he claim her as dependent?
so technically, so we'll get into some of the independent rules, we're gonna go into those slides right after this. So we're gonna get into those slides in just a minute on independence, because we have our dependent section. So we have filing status, in this case, what filing status did she choose? So for single, okay, and then everybody okay with filling out her first name? These are demographic information. Everyone okay with getting first name, last name, social security number, address, phone number? Any questions on this top part? So you're filling it out, everyone has their pencil. If you do this and you leave, that knowing you filled out a tax return, you know, this is really where it's at. So has everybody filled that section in? So it's that second form 1040 we're working on. We have the scenario on that first page called Priscilla Price tax return, and we're working on the 1040, the IRS 2022 1040. There are different versions of this that are easier to fill out. We're going to go through the most complicated version so that you feel like you got this. So, okay, so the first part, we collect some single, we put in the demographic information. And then why do they start with what's your filing status? It's like the most complicated question. Great, I'll just throw it all out. But no, we made it through. We selected single. And for our situations, we're going to look at those individually based on what we talked about. And then demographic information, no problem, right? We know our demographics. These, we're going to say no, we don't want to donate to this campaign. Is that good with everyone?
There is no.
Well, we just don't click, you don't click the box, leave it empty. And then here, it does start asking this here, do you have digital assets? It's either yes or no. And then we're going to move into standard deduction. So on this section, it's saying, okay, can somebody claim you as a dependent or your spouse as a dependent? Hopefully not, right? Because then you get the full credit. You can claim yourself, you get that exemption there. And then hopefully yeah. And if you are born before 1958 or you're blind, then you get extra added to your standard deduction. So we'll look at that in just a minute. These are just like, I don't know, tax forms crack me up because it's like they're giving you certain incentives for doing certain things. They're essentially trying to like get people to do certain things. So I think that's interesting. And then, okay, now any questions from there, and then we'll get into the kind of section.
Question, if your spouse is not legal, doesn't have a social security, but has an IT number, can you put him on the tax?
So perfect question going into dependent. So we'll go into that slide. Anybody other questions about this? Anything up to here to dependents? All right, next question, getting right into dependents. Hopefully this answers your question. Okay, so first thing is to claim someone as a dependent, you cannot be claimed as a dependent. Second rule, they have to be a citizen or resident. Third rule, you have to be the only person claiming them. So this includes children, living with somebody. And then last one, they can't be filing a joint return. So if you're trying to claim your son who's 26, who's filing a joint return with his spouse, you can't do that. So these are the rules for everyone. If you're trying to claim them as a dependent, these are the rules.
If you have a parent that's from another country, lives with you, is not a citizen yet, neither a resident.
So they would have to be a citizen or resident. Under the other rules, they will. So the next section, you're going to see, oh, that works, except right here. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I have a daughter, and I'm just wondering, I'm not with a father, so I'm single, and we're married. But would I be finding single or have household at this point? I've always thought
Great
single.
question.
Because you have a child.
I love how the group's like, yeah, we're gonna help you with that. Head of council is here. It's a complicated question, but the answer is you get more tax benefits for filing head of household. But to do that, there are certain requirements, like we talked about here, is to file as head of household, you cannot be married, You have to pay more than half the cost of keeping your home. You have to have that home as a principal residence for that child. And then you have to, like, nobody else can be claiming them because there might be some other thing where someone else is claiming them, so you're not really able to. So there's special circumstances for there. But the best filing status, best benefits, married filing jointly. Next best is head of household, if you can do that. The next best is single, and then try to avoid married filing separately unless you really don't trust your spouse and what they're doing, and you are officially married. If you don't trust your spouse and what they're doing, maybe do the legal separation, so.
Unfortunately, always considered the resident, but I know there's kind of, tax resident or any other kind of residence who's considered to be resident.
That is a really, really great question.
Was a resident card me?
So it's just the only guidelines they give us really is this, their citizen or resident. So we can go into, if you were able to open up that drive, we can go into the specific instructions in the IRS 1040 instructions. So if anybody wants to look that up and find out what's considered resident, it will be in there.
Because a lot of people think resident, being a resident of Santa Clarita, for example, like leaving Santa Clarita.
Resident,
Why didn't you it's resident by having the card?
For resident of the United States.
Yeah.
Yes. And so if you have questions, the trick to being really, really good at taxes is one, to just know your specific situation. So getting those questions answered, like, okay, what is my claim status? Knowing that, researching and saying, okay, I'm for sure this. And then if you have those specific things, like 1 year I had to do adoption tax credits, and everyone I talked to didn't know anything about it. Even the CPAs, they're like, I've never dealt with that before. So just researching and reading instructions. So where I get all my information, irs.gov, forms and publications, and I just research the questions on there. I don't Google it. I don't listen to, my friends. I go irs.gov, forms and publications. And for this case, we're going to be looking at the 1040. We're going to be looking at the instructions. And then they have a really, really specific guide on the dependents. They have a whole forms on this, on 88 and 32. So this is so make sure they meet these. They have to meet these first to claim as a dependent. They have to, you can't be claimed as a dependent. So this is why you might, it might not make sense just to your spouse or for him to claim you, or, because if you're, and then they have to be a citizen or resident of the United States. You have to be the only person claiming them. They must not be filing a joint return. Disclosure, there's exceptions to like the little things everywhere. So you want to go through and read. If you have a question and you have that really unique situation, please read the instructions. And then after you've met those, then you go in here to decide, okay, are they qualifying child or are they qualifying relative? And they're really, really simple. It's just, are they related to you? Do they meet the age requirements? So to be a qualifying child, they have to be under 19, or if they're a student, under 24. Do they live with you? There are some exceptions if they're at college or different things. And do you financially support them? So this is qualifying child, qualifying relative. They don't have to live with you. So this is where it talks about relatives who don't live with you, full publication on dependents. And then so they have to make less than a certain amount, and then you have to financially support them. So really similar questions, but we start with the first overall ones. They meet all these. Yes, move on. Do they meet these? Then they're qualifying child. Here are the qualifying relative. So
a lot of Latinos here, they claim their parents that live in Mexico as dependents because they're sending them money.
yes,
And they're older, they will work. So I was, when you say that they have to be here and they have to be struggling,
so this one
they
is,
still support them because they ask
Yes.
to prove,
yes.
you need some money, right? So.
So I understand what you're saying. I've heard this, especially, I worked with a lot of refugees from Afghanistan, and they sent hundreds of dollars back to their parents. But they can't claim their parents as a dependent, even though they're supporting them, because they don't meet these things.
Yeah.
They're not a U.S. resident.
And then they don't meet, then if we move to the next slide, yeah, they'll be a qualifying relative, but then let's look at this. Do you provide more than half of their total support? Maybe, but then, then we go back to the first one. Are they? Yes.
So even if I'm unemployed mom, I can still file for the company, do we just care for her and I look for the resources to get the help?
So you just want to look at your situation. You say, step one, are you married? If the answer is no, then okay, keep going. If you paid more than half the cost of keeping the home, it's okay if you're getting help to do this. not help as if like someone else is literally paying the cost for you. But like if I'm on food stamps or if I'm getting something, I'm still providing for them. And then if the home is a prison role, they live with me. So if you meet these, then you do that. Again, a good place to look for that would be the instructions in the 1040. Were you able to pull that one up for the citizen or resident question? We'll keep going for a little bit and then we'll come back to that one. Okay, so we're going back. We have our filing status. We have the demographic information. We have our deduction. We're just saying, okay, filling that out if it counts. And then dependents. We just made it through a dependent section. A lot of unique situations. Everyone has a different situation.
Like this is for Priscilla, she doesn't have.
So Priscilla, we made this easy. She doesn't have any dependents. We're gonna keep it easy because we want to feel empowered.
Yeah.
Like we just did her tax return, right? Okay, so we should have this first section. Anybody not have this first section filled out or need help with these very first ones? So name, demographics, filing status, and dependents. Any questions on that? Thanks for helping her on that one. Anybody on Zoom have a question? If you want to put it in the chat, you can. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and plow forward. We got to our dependent section. There are some tiebreaker rules if you have dependents. I think this will be a great question for the next workshop as well. So first, if you have it, this is where it gets kind of tricky sometimes. Like you said, well, I'm the head of household, I'm training her, I'm just providing for her. But sometimes there will be some type of a court filing that says, no, actually, he gets to claim her. So you'll want to double check and make sure there's not something like that on file. And then if there's if you have a legal separation and there's some kind of a thing on that, or if you're divorced and you have a custody agreement, again, next
just the non-marriage of the parents,
yeah,
other potential parent that can claim.
like you were never married and you had
So we could do the 8332 for application of dependency exemption. My experience is typically the
I don't know if that's good. So what he said is the 8832, they can file that and it really articulates who gets to claim this child as a dependent, whether that situation is a legal separation, a divorce, or just the other parent who were never married to. And he's saying it typically goes to who they're living with, but sometimes it can just be here. And then a lot of times it'll favor whoever just filed their tax return first. So you'll see that I had a situation with that already this year.
I've seen so there was discussions in Facebook like parents separated and they get very upset. I told him I'm gonna claim it, but he still put it on. What should I do? Because she lives with me.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I think it's kind of unfair for first file.
Yeah.
But
well, it's not a rule, it just means the second file has to mail file. And then
there's a fight.
Yes, to who actually gets to.
So what she said is she has a friend that lives with her that's frustrated because they made an agreement, a verbal agreement, that she's going to claim them, and then he hurried and filed before her and gets it. It doesn't mean that they're supposed to and that they get to. It just means they filed it first, and so they're like, okay, let's do this. But the minute another tax return comes with a dependent claim with that same social security number, red flag. Let's figure this out, and then it will not let you e-file. You'll have to paper file, like you said, and it's just a debate from there. So. Yeah, by all means, you should still file and try it, but it's a mess. Did you have something, Christy? Okay, so we made it through the dependents, some of the hardest things. So tax return situation, we should have her social security number on it. This is all made up. Did you know this? That they will never issue a social security number with the 666 first or the zeros in those positions. So it's not real. And then this address doesn't really exist. The date of birth might. Actually, I tried to find a fake. Okay, and so we should have all of our demographic information entered. So here we are. This is what your return should look like. We should have her name, her social security number. We've checked single. We put in her address. We've gone ahead and said no, she doesn't have digital assets, and she's not a dependent. She's not blind. She's not born before 1958, and she doesn't have any dependents. Oh, her life is easy, but it's not as fun.
Right. She pays a lot of taxes. She's single, not dependent.
Depends, yeah. Depends. It's all progressive. So let's see how much she makes. The next section will take us through that. So as we get through that next section, it's going to take us through this is the next section. So we're kind of demystifying it. We're going to look at this section where it says income. That's what we're going to work through. So I'm gonna bring your attention to these lines. So this is all you really need to know. There's like, what, 15 lines and then an A, B, C, D through Z. I mean, there's a lot of lines on here. We're just gonna focus on these lines. We're gonna focus on total income, and then we're gonna look at our adjustments to income. We're gonna decide if we do standard deduction or itemized deduction. Then we're going to go ahead and say, okay, then what is our taxable income? Calculate our tax, figure out what our tax is, figure out what we've already paid, or if we have any credits that are refundable, and then look at our total payments.
Let's say total income is only total amount.
Yeah, so the first one, box 1A, starts with total amount from W-2. So this is anything you've made from wages from work.
So it's the same as the
Total income is going to be all the way down to on line 9. We'll say this is your total income. Because in this case, Priscilla has some other stuff. So Priscilla has, what do we put on line 1A?
1A.
What do we put on 1A for her total amount from W-2? There's a lot of numbers on there because they give them to you.
71.
Okay, so she puts on her wages 71,059. And then we scroll down, she doesn't have any other income except when we get to taxable interest in line 2B. Does somebody know what she has for taxable interest? That's on a 1099 INT. That's tax matter. So how much is her taxable interest?
12. Federal income tax. 12,000. So she has a federal income and state income.
Yes, okay.
You didn't make enough money in working last week. Well, $110 in interest, so therefore it's not making it.
That's a good point. I think I had,
Well, she didn't make enough money this year.
I had that she had 600 in interest, but then I don't see it. It looks like it kind of,
It's
yeah, it came off the form. Okay. So the other thing that's really complicated about this, did you notice how many extra boxes we have? Federal income, social security wages, social security tax, Medicare, all of those boxes, you can just cross them out. We'll enter them on the form or we'll upload it straight from our W-2. But the only thing we care about here is we want to circle wages. So when you get a confusing W-2, this is what you need to look at. Your wages, just circle that. All this other is just informational. And then go ahead and circle the state, at the very bottom, the federal tax.
Oh.
We'll look at all those ones, yeah. So the most important lines on here, it won't tell us that, we'll have to calculate that.
So it will confusing because the updates, so it's federal income tax, it says 12,000, but then she still owes federal tax.
The federal income tax, okay, so it should say federal income tax withheld right there. So her wages were 71,059, and then her federal income tax rate withheld after that. Withheld was 12,711. So those are the boxes on our W-2 I'm most concerned about. They give us all this information and it just confuses us, right? Like on box 13, check retirement plan, what does that even mean? Right? Do we care? Do we need to know about that? No.
Because in the 1099, it comes out everything that you call from this check.
So a 1099 is what? So there's a difference between a W-2 and a 1099. What's the difference between those two?
W-2 is the one you send them and your signature, so they can take out, so
Okay,
they can tax you
okay,
on the
so,
income you're making.
so when you get hired by an employer, you fill out a form called a W-9 and you tell them how much to withhold. And then at the end of the year, by I guess January 31st, they mail you what's called a W-2 that says, that looks a little bit like this and tells you what you made that year. Yeah, okay, so, and then what is a 1099? There's a bunch of different- Wait, if you're an independent contractor, you might get a 1099 from the bank. You might get a 1099. There's a bunch of different types of interest income. In this case, it looks like it came off, but she had $600 from this bank in interest income.
Because a lot of, let's say the Uber drivers, they are
Yes.
contracted.
1099.
They give it 1099. And a lot of companies say, okay, I won't do you, but you're not mine.
Yeah.
You are just.
And independent contractor. I don't want to withhold taxes for you. And I don't want to do the W-2 thing. So here you go. I'll give you 1099. Yes, that is true. So where would we go if we have 1099? Where would that even go? How do we put that in?
Oh, you mean that's based on the.
No, actually, so this would go on a schedule 1. So this right here This is the IRS's version of trying to simplify the tax return and keep it to one page. You know what they did instead? They added 2 more pages. There's something called a Schedule 1 now, where if you have income that doesn't fit in these lines, you have to fill out the Schedule 1. We'll look at that in just a minute. But in this case, let's go ahead and put in her, we're going to start with taxable earnings. So in this situation, she had, I don't know why it came off, but she had interest income of $600. She had federal tax, excuse me, let's say her wages of $71,059, and then her interest income of $600. So that's all we're worried about here. All of this information is just informational. And then federal tax, we'll look at this later.
I'm a little confused because they take out the taxes from federal taxes, they tax from her paycheck.
Yeah, so she
But
had,
you still always.
no, hold on, we'll get there, but yes, that is confusing. I just put this on here to make it easy for us. So she had 12,000 withheld. And she made 71,000 and she had 12,000 withheld. That's what will be on the other. So we'll just move forward with that information. So we'll go ahead and put that in taxable earnings. So line 1A, wages earned. So go ahead and put the amount you said was 71. And then in the 71,059. Everyone get that part? So line 1A is her wages. And then we're going to go down. She did make interest income of $600, and that's going to go on line 2B, on line 2A, and then scroll over to B on that line. So 2B should be $600. Any questions just getting her wages done?
Interest income, it means
Yeah.
like she got interest,
From her bank
Bank?
account, yeah,
okay, from.
or
savings.
from, yeah, something like that. That would be a lot. I mean,
I
good for her.
know.
Like, what is she investing in? I was thinking the same thing. Okay, so we got our taxable earnings, and then we're gonna move forward from there. So the first thing we said is we're gonna report all income, and if you have extra income, you're gonna put that on Schedule 1. I told you we look at what a Schedule 1 looks like. This is what a Schedule 1 looks like. So in case you catch that, we're just simplifying the tax return by adding another page. So if you have unemployment income, you have business income or alimony, if you have state income tax returns, if you have any of this income, you have to file this form with it.
Schedule 1.
I didn't put it in with that, you don't need it for this case, so. And then the bottom part is step 2. What we're gonna do next, if we look at our form, is we're gonna figure out what our adjustments are. And so this does come from a Schedule 1. She doesn't have any adjustments to income, but in this case, our adjustments are generally things like if you paid alimony, and that's, you get to deduct that, student loans,
Now,
interest.
Schedule 1, usually, from my experience, let's say you work full-time, but then you have a small business
Yeah,
aside,
that's
you
Schedule
put
C.
in the schedule, or Schedule C?
Yes,
Okay.
it's, right, it just doesn't get much easier than that, right? Well, let's look at this, actually. Okay, let's see. Business income or loss on line 3, it says attach to Schedule C. So you get to do both. So you'll do your Schedule C, calculate all your business income, then you'll get to come up here and put it on line C, then you get to go back and you get to put it on this line right here, where it says adjustments. Fun, right? Yeah, but we got this because she's simple. She doesn't have business income. We can do this. Don't fill this out.
Didn't leave on this time.
When she had to have all the side hustles, right? You're right. So she must have not worked now when she had to have a bunch of side hustles. So these are some of the deductions. She didn't have any of these common deductions. And now the next step, we're going to try to figure out what adjusted gross income is. And essentially it's just, here's our taxable income after we take all of our income that we made, and then we take out all the deductions. So we're going to calculate our adjusted gross income. This is our next step. So step 1, calculate our wages. Step 2, calculate our deductions. Step 3, calculate our adjusted gross income. You've heard this term before, right? So this one gets confusing because some people think, because I'll pull up a slide that says, if you need help, you can go ahead and go to this Vital Lab, and if your AGI or adjusted gross income is under this amount, but they think, oh, that's what's on the W-2. No, that's not the amount that's on the W-2. It's this much. It's after all your income and then your deductions. So in this case, she's going to go ahead and have her total amount on W-2. She's going to have the 71,059, and then she's going to have 600 interest, and then her total income, she didn't have anything in between. It's just going to be the same, and then her AGI is going to be the same in this case, but it won't always be. If you have the side hustles or you have other deductions like student loan interest or educator expenses, those things. Then, so everyone's okay till this point. Then the second page isn't too hard. So then we're going to determine what our itemized or standard deductions are, and then we're going to figure out what our taxable income is. So for itemized or standard, anybody heard of these terms or anybody familiar with what we're talking about?
Very much.
You've heard of that. So essentially deductions just reduce your taxable income. And so we're looking at it, we're saying, okay, we can have adjustments to income or we can have an itemized or standard deduction.
So you can choose one or either, or the other, right?
When we're talking about, so yes, so on this line right here, standard or itemized, on line 12, you can do standard or itemized. Why would we want to do itemized or why would we want to do standard deduction? So right here, it tells us right here, if we're single, we get 12,900. If we're married, filing jointly, we get 25,900. Everyone's seeing why you'd want that. Or single. Headed household, you get 19,400. You can see why that would be better than single. And then, so what would we want to do here? So this is what itemized looks like. You have to fill out an itemized deduction. It's on a schedule. No, we don't need it on this one, so it's not here, but it is on the drive with all of the forms are all in the drive. So here, we just say, hey, this is what helps us and this is what makes us able to have itemized. Some people, if you pay, these are when you would know, like maybe it's worthwhile to close up. Do you pay a lot of interest on like a mortgage? A lot. It has to be more than, obviously we go back to the table. So you have to pay more than, if you're single, 12,950 per year, or married planning jointly, 19,400. So are you really paying that much? So, or added in that, some people also make a lot of gifts to charity. So if you have those two things, then that would be, I don't see a lot of people itemizing unless they make a lot of gifts to charity and do this. And some people will say, I have a ton of medical expenses. Those are limited. You only get to claim 7.5% of those. And that's like, you can't include what your insurance is paying. So it really is unique situations for that to occur or any other things. It's really, really
And the rich
uncommon.
people, that's what they put the gift in charity.
They do that.
That's what they get rid of.
That's what they do. They just put it all there
Yeah, and when you get them out,
Yeah.
oh, that person did this, I'm like, yeah,
because they got their deduction. So in this case, she's gonna go ahead and use the standard deduction because she is single and she didn't have enough itemized deduction, so she's gonna do that. Any questions on that part, to get that part? And then just jumping, okay, so we'll go ahead and finish up. It looks like we're running a little short on time, so we're gonna go ahead and just jump through the second half of the tax return. So we'll go ahead and say, okay, so we went ahead and we put our income, we got all this, we got down to here. We got our income, we got our interest income, we got our total income. We figured out our adjusted gross income because we didn't have any deductions. We said we want to do itemized because we have more itemized than, we said we want to do the standard deduction because we don't have any itemized. And then we came down and said, okay, we put it here. And then what we do, so what a standard or the standard deduction is essentially, the IRS is saying you get to keep this much money for free every year. You get to keep that much for free. That we won't tax you on that amount.
wow, how nice.
I know, it really is, isn't it? And that's why your filing status matters. That's why they put that at the beginning, is because that amount changes based on your filing status. Any questions to this point right here? So we got her standard itemized deduction, adjusted gross income, got it all. We got her taxable income. So what does her taxable income come down to?
58.
And then we got that from subtracting the standard deduction from her income. Any questions up to that point? It's not so scary, right? If we just break it down like this into sections, is everyone still feeling like, what is she talking about?
It's because it's simple for her. It's just saying, oh, she doesn't have itemized deduction.
It can be simple for us. You're saying it's really simple for her because she doesn't have all these complications. It can be simple for us too. It's just the trick I've learned is learning what is in your unique situation. And this is why I don't have a sustainable part of my business of like doing taxes for people, because they come to me and I'm like, I want to teach you how to do this yourself. Because you care more and you know more about your situation than I do. So let's get you here. Let's fill out this form together, one that you have access to, and you have to keep the information you're here, and it will tell you exactly what's your situation. Let's do what's your filing status, what are your businesses, and then it's easier. You're here. We just start here, but it does get easier as we just memorize that. So that second page really pulls into our tax, and if you'll notice, on the bottom, this is where I said you're a little bit confused. It tells you, I told you what the federal tax was owed. Generally, you get this from the tax table. You go in and you're like, okay, so you're this much, but less than this much. We're going to scroll down. You see her 58.70 right here. So her tax is 85.37. That's a lot of money, huh? That's how much she'll owe in tax. Or you can just look at the form I went ahead and wrote in, or if you're using a software, it will autofill that for you, the tax up top. So the next part is just looking at the additional taxes and the child tax credit in her situation. In her specific situation, she didn't have any of that to worry about. Like you said, makes it a little bit simple, but if she did have the the additional taxes or the child tax credit, that's kind of where she put that. So we determined the tax owed, and then we looked at the tax table to find that, or we did in our software, looked at our paper. We got that from it, said it's federal income tax owed, and then we moved and we put that in. Okay, here's her tax. We're gonna pull that down because she doesn't have any of those credits, and then it pulls it down to her total tax. So if you had the additional child tax credit, if you had these, then that would change your additional child tax credit and tax credit. That would change your amount of tax owed. And then this is what our form, this, if you're filling this out, it should look like this, the taxes and credits, that section on page 2. The taxes and credits. And then that next section, so this is kind of the forms you'll look at if you do. So if you're not as simple as hers, if you do have the child tax credit, it's a different, this is where this will come from.
Go back.
8812. Yes, right there.
Also, this phone number.
Yes, because she didn't have any adjustments, so we go ahead and add that. And if you, again, like I said, tax returns are all about just reading instructions well. And so it just says, pull that number down, pull that number down, pull that number down. So it's not too complicated. If you did have the child, the dependent stuff, this is the form we fill out. And again, it's not too complicated because we're just gonna go through and read what it's telling us to do. It's gonna say, okay, how many dependents do you have? And then ask you those questions and take you through there. And then the next thing is we're gonna do those withholdings and payments. So this is where that came in, how much she had withheld. So how much did Priscilla in this case have withheld on her tax return?
12,711.
Perfect, yeah, so she had $12,711 withheld. So right there, we put that federal. So we did our payments, that's what she paid as a considered payments for the year. And then the next part is calculating the tax credits. And so this is where it comes into play, things like the earned income credit and the child tax credit. This is where those things come into play. I know we talked about the child tax credit earlier because there's different forms of that, the additional child tax credit and then child tax credit. She doesn't have any of those because her life is simple. But if she did, this is kind of where she'd get the earned income credit. You fill out these forms, really specific requirements. And this takes us through the qualifying child rules that we talked about earlier. And for her situation, again, so she's gonna have, this is what she withheld, we're gonna add those up, and it's just the same number pulling down through that.
Now, an adopted child qualifies as a child.
Yes. And a foster child for that matter. So that we have all her information, we put it in. Our next thing is we're gonna calculate, does she owe money or is she getting money back? And when we do this, we just put in her information, we put in what she owed, right? So we said, okay, she owes $85.37, but she had this much withheld, so she's clearly gonna get a refund. It's not uncommon to get a refund from federal and get an O tax for the state. That's not uncommon. Everyone's nodding. You're nodding.
In total, she pays about 21,000 on her 8 plus 12.
She had 8,000 withheld. So she only owed 8, she had 12,000 withheld, and so she's getting refund for 4,174. She's not adding both of those together, she's not paying 20,000 in taxes. That's where that.
I'm just calculating on days how much she's making. She's making 71,000. 12 of 8 minus 4. So she's paying an average of.
You're trying to calculate what her marginal tax rate is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to see how much, so if she paid, she would withheld 12,771, she still owes 8,537.
So she doesn't still owe this. She only owed this amount and she had too much withheld. She only owes 8,000. She had 12,000 withheld. That means they're gonna give her back 4,000.
Okay.
A lot of people are like, yeah, I get a refund. It's like, well, yeah, because you let them use your money for a year.
Yeah.
Congratulations. But hey, if that's your savings plan, so be it, right? So she only owed 8,500 and then she paid 12,000, so she's gonna get 4,000 back and she only owed 8,000.
Okay, so
Does that clarify?
yeah, she paid around 8.
Yes, so she only paid 8,000. So if you want to calculate the percentage she paid, you would take the 8,000, that amount, and 10% her income divided by that. Almost, yeah, 10%. Yeah, so she's paying about 10% in taxes. Okay, so that really takes it. And then just to summarize, these are the big changes if you happen to know what happened last year to this year. I have some bad news. Your refunds are not going to be as big this year. if you were getting that, and this is why they deleted tons of stuff. So the child tax credit, they had that up to like 36,000 if they're under 5, and then they had a maximum, they changed all this back to the old 50,000. The dependent care credit is lower, everything for childcare, your things, they used to give you on the front page of the form that we were going through, the 1040, they used to say, oh, you donated to charity, we're gonna give you $600 on that front page. They don't do that now. If you don't itemize on that big itemized deductions, you don't get credit. If you make any charitable contributions that aren't more than your standard deduction, you don't really get credit for that. And then things like there's a lower earned income credit, that's going to be down if you don't have kids, and then you don't get to deduct your mortgage insurance premiums, which would be on that itemized. So big deal. It changes.
Because I feel like the mortgage.
Yeah, right. And then the childcare stuff. Yeah. So that's what it's like.
It's the one they give us.
No, it's through your work. You can make it plan and select. So these are the big changes from last year, this year. And then I've gone ahead in that Google Drive. I have all of these documents, all of the instructions, the forms that we talked about. Like, where is it? It's in that drive. If you want to look at that one more time. So if you have questions, you can go back and look through it. Do you feel comfortable? Did that like break it down, demystify it a little bit? Or, okay, you're nodding, thank you. And then some of you are looking at me like, oh my goodness, I have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, so I'll go ahead and jump to the bottom. So we kind of went through that. And then I had gone and put together the state refund to the state tax return. So that will be in there as well, the completed one. And so this is where you'll find all that. Again, this is the shared link to the Google Drive you can go to. It has all the forms in it. Has all the forms in it. Has the solution. Everything you need will be in here. Does that work?
We have a few questions on the Padlet. I think you covered them, but do you want me to say the questions and then you could always potentially answer them on the Padlet?
Sure.
Okay. Are there any situations when you don't need to file taxes at all? For example, you have too low of an income.
That is that situation. So remember how I talked about they're going to let you make, like, if you're single, 12,900 for free. So if you were to fill that out and you were like, my wages are 12,900, and then you go down and you put in your standard deduction of 12,900, and then you come down like my income zero, like my taxable income is zero, then you would need to file. A lot of times you'll want to file anyway, just because you might get a refund.
Okay.
So you don't necessarily have to if you're making under whatever you would take off, whatever amount they're letting you make. Unless you, and there's other situations, you have self-employment income of like more than 600, you have to file, there's different situations.
This is actually my question. I have that if I earn less than certain amount, that I don't need to file at all.
Yes, so that's true.
So I don't need to complete any forms, or I still need to complete the forms to show that my income is so low.
If you don't make more than on that front page of the 1040, when we went through it, put your income in and then put what you subtract from that income in. So of your standard deduction or itemized deduction. So if you're single, that amount would be like 12,900. If I only make 12,900 or less, then if I'm single, I wouldn't file. If I'm head of household and I make less than, I think that was 19,000, I can't remember the exact amount, then I wouldn't file. You don't have to file. What I suggest to everyone though is that you file. You don't have to file with the IRS if you don't want to, but go ahead and fill it out and see what happens. Would you get a refund if you do it? Would you not get a refund? What would happen if you filed? Would you owe them money? Don't file. Would you be able to get money back? File. So it just depends on your situation. Or are you trying to, what about Social Security later on? Like, do you want to show that you've made money so many years in a row? So you just have to look at your individual situation. I know some moms that are like in their 60s that are like, I've never filed a tax return and I'm trying to collect Social Security. So it's gonna be a little hard.
So this can be a case of a lot of refugees. They come, they start, and they don't really have, or you have to see, because it's gonna hurt you later. If you don't make enough income, but you wanna buy a house, or you wanna make, you wanna get the citizenship, they're gonna ask you the last.
Yes. So there might be reasons, you might have reasons to do it. It doesn't mean you can't file later, but no, you don't, there are some things that come after if you don't file. And
You can always file later, right? Like,
you could.
because I know people, they didn't make their tax for the last few years.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's how.
Does that help?
Yes, they would, and look, I can file later.
Yes.
Does it mean that I can file later? Previous?
Yes, asking questions.
Okay, so I can file like 2024 or
22 for the last 2 years. You can. If you owe money, file right away. If you don't owe money, then you can file later.
Because they can penalize you. So
If you
owe
owe.
money, they penalize you and it's.
I understand that.
Yes.
I'm just pretty sure that I don't owe anyone.
I would fill out a form and just do that.
There's 2 more questions, but they're pretty specific. Would you be able to potentially answer them in the Padlet?
Yes.
And then someone could go back in and check the answer there, would that work?
And everybody keep that Padlet open if you had a question that didn't get answered today, and just check this. I'll do some research and put those back in. And then I just want to point out, this is your resource. If you think that you qualify for free tax help, or even if you don't qualify and you just want to go see it anyway, scan this code. The appointments are filling up really fast at the College of the Canyons. I think it's still important to understand your situation, but please, if you think you can benefit from, it's usually like you make less than 2,000. And that's your AGI, so that's why it's not your total income on your W-2. So last I checked, I keep checking every week, they have like 2 appointments available 2 weeks, so please sign up if you think you might need that help. Or do they still have openings? Did it pull up? Did they have openings at all?
I didn't check.
Did it pull up for you? Did they have openings?
You have to put the date.
Oh, too much work. Okay,
They don't tell the right way.
try to do this today. And don't say I'm gonna do that.
So
later.
you see, you open up
Yes.
and then they ask what day.
Okay, they have openings on the 8th. The only time they have openings is the 8th. Okay, so please, if you need help
And a lot of times,
at the College of the Canyons.
11 to 3 p.m.
Okay,
Yeah.
they have appointments on April 8th from 11 to 3. Those are the only ones open. So please do this. Okay, great.
I
And
really
even,
did mine, but you can always tell other people, you know.
and even if you make,
Curiosity, we will give the legal stuff.
as soon as I sit down, and everyone wants me to stop talking, so I will definitely do that. I will definitely do the good work. Are you ready for
Oh,
it?
okay, sure.
Okay, okay, let me get out of this.
Yeah, sure. I need to.
So anyway, I'd just like to say we're going to take about a 10-minute quick break, so then come back and we'll be all ready to go. Thank you. And thank you, Tressa. That was very interesting and beneficial.
Thank you, Douglas. Again, I'm really happy to be here. When it comes to, we can be interactive, but when it comes to questions, one of the things is we have to avoid becoming too specific about the actual case, because I am a practicing attorney. I've got 12 lawyers that work for me. So we have many relations, and while I don't recognize faces, that's not enough for me to understand whether or not we have a legal conflict. So we need to stay away from anything specific, but we can talk about hypotheticals. We'll go through a number of things. Family law is really in pretty broad topic. That's not the word. That's the word. Okay, enough about me. So we're going to go over a few things in the umbrella of family law, particularly the things that are happening in what we call the family law department to the Los Angeles Superior Court or the other counties. And that's going to be your divorce, what we call dissolution, legal separation, what previously was paternity cases or referred to as parentage cases. And we may have some time to talk about domestic violence, and maybe a slide in there. That's a big part of what's happening in today's world and has significant impact on every one of these issues that could otherwise come up in the case. And then I know that there was a question about family law referrals to lawyers, and we will have a list of resources where people can reach out to at least get some advice of an attorney. So within marriage, and when a couple separates and they want to do something legally to change the legal contract for how the law applies to the relationship, you would either do it by a petition to dissolve the marriage or a petition for legal separation. On the filing of either of those actions, the summons issues, and on the back of the summons, there's something to be called ATROs, automatic temporary restraining orders. And they're basically instructions, good conduct orders. If there's any minor children of the relationship, they can't leave the state. It would be against the law to remove them from the state without an agreement of the other parents or court. Can't cancel insurance, can't change beneficiaries, can't go raid the bank account, can't do any number of things. Well, we fix it. Not supposed to. So what happens when the paperwork gets served and you have these automatic temporary restraining orders, they don't self-effectuate. So if there is some concern that even after serving the paperwork and the ATROs going into effect, that something's going to happen, typically we need to take additional steps. So if we know somebody's going to raid like a large brokerage account or something like that, we may advise the brokerage firm that the action is pending, and that within a period of 3 business days, we'll get a restraining order from the court to absolutely freeze things. But we start with some basics in the restraining orders, and for the most part, people will respect them. Once a case is started, it has to conclude. So we're going to talk about any number of ways to get to the end process. Hopefully, you know, what we try to do first and foremost, rather than fighting, is to try to transition a family to preserve as much dignity in the family as possible, as well as your wealth, reserving the fighting when we have to fight. Okay. To file for a divorce, you have to be a resident of the state of California for a period of at least 6 months. In the county in which you file, you must be a resident for a period of at least 3 months. So if somebody flies in from that state, sets up residence, and they say, but I want to effectuate a separation, you know, legally, so that we end our community, what do? You can file an action for legal separation because it doesn't have a residency requirement. It will establish the date that you're separated and the community is no longer benefiting from, you know, the efforts of the spouses. It sort of isolates and freezes things. And should a dissolution be your ultimate goal, once you hit the residency requirement of 6 months, you can convert legal separation to a dissolution. Some people take legal separation all the way through. It's rarer these days because one of the big things that we used to get out of it would be the dependent health insurance. So typically that would mean like one spouse had some significant medical conditions and they were dependent on the other spouse's usually employer provided insurance. But what we found over the last number of years, most of these insurance companies are disqualifying spouses that you're legally separated from. So that's basically how it. The other thing is, I'd say for every 10 of these, 9 come back and say, I need a divorce. So we really try at the onset to discourage going down that route. So the basics, paperwork, it's a summons and petition. It's not very difficult. You can go to the courthouse. They have self-help, basically easier, even easier to receive the taxes. Much easier questions to go through, to go ahead and do it. Additional forms if there's any minor children. And after you file your case, then the other party needs to be served. That party then has 30 days from the time that they're served to go ahead and respond to the petition, or they could be subject to having their default taken. So one of the most basic things in marriage law, divorce and legal separation is understanding that the legal position between spouses is referred to as a fiduciary. I don't know if anybody watches television, but occasionally you see some investment bankers say, well, what's the difference between us? We're fiduciaries. Okay, what's a fiduciary? Fiduciary is the highest level that one can occupy for trust and honesty in the relationship. Go figure. I mean, every people, the highest, like they're going to tell us the truth all the time. Well, they're supposed to. But we take it kind of seriously when it comes to the disclosure of financial information. So each of the parties are obligated to do this disclosure process, or you can't get the dissolution. The disclosure is all material facts and information relating to the nature of the assets and debts of the parties, whether it's community property, separate property, quasi-community property, alien property, made-up property, unvested property, everything. Ramification of failing to disclose is highlighted by a case late 90s where she won the lottery. She really did, but she didn't tell him, and she got a divorce. And then he gets a letter, and he finds out she won the lottery. So it goes back to the judge. She won $1 million. What does the judge do? Here's your half. Tell you what, little bonus. I'm going to give you her half too. Now, sir, how much have you paid in attorney's fees? Because I'm going to make her pay that too. So there's a lot of teeth in the failure to disclose. How much it's followed up on is a different story, Teresa.
Can we start this back up a little bit? What, if you define marriage, like when you would actually need to file for divorce or separation? Can you actually define marriage for us in this case?
Yeah, so marriage, that's a good question. Marriage is a legal bond that's formed between two parties. You know, it's no longer husband and wife, it could be two parties. And what they're doing is they're submitting to the laws of the jurisdiction and going through the process that jurisdiction sets in place. Most places in the United States require a license, require a ceremony, and then the license goes back to the county recorder. Whole different ball of wax if there's a defect in those as far as what we do and how we treat it. Whole different ball of wax when, you know, he said he got divorced from his first wife, but they didn't follow up on it and it never actually came through. Or one of my favorites, I got a guy from Ireland. Ireland didn't have divorce until the late 90s. So he hired somebody in the Dominican Republic to get him a proxy divorce there. Then he goes marrying. Then his Irish wife files for divorce in Dublin. He participates in that case too. And then his current wife comes in, very solid, and she's very Catholic and she's very concerned. What do you mean I'm not married? What do you mean it's a bigamous marriage? Boy, what do you mean? So all of those things come up, but interestingly enough, if a spouse or a person who believes that they're a spouse are acting innocently, they get treated in a way that we call a punitive spouse. So we just make believe that it actually happened, unless it's something that they could not have a good faith belief that they were actually married. Marriage validity is based upon the jurisdiction in which they get married. So let's say you go to Japan to get married. Guess what? You're married here. Let's say you go to Lebanon and you marry your third wife. Guess what? You're not married here. So while it may be legal in Lebanon, this is a case just published last year, it won't pass muster here in the United States because it was clearly bigamous, and we do not, as a matter of public policy, endorse polygamy. That's how we took that into the union.
So, just to clarify, just living with somebody in this state isn't, there's nothing.
Good, okay. So you're talking about a concept that has been referred to as common law marriage. In other words, we've held ourselves out. We operate like married persons. And the reality is, there used to be 7 states that would recognize a common law marriage, typically after a period of like 7 years. And had you qualified for a common law marriage in one of those 7 states, subsequently come to California, we'll treat you like married. But the reality is there's a big difference between being married and not married, we're living together. Big difference. None of the mutual duties and responsibilities apply to non-marital partners, just they don't. There's other laws that may apply, maybe you have joint business relationships or things like that, but for the most part, marriage is a. Okay, so we talked about the temporary orders. Those are the atros, but also in addition, you know, we start a case here. And you know the way the things go, you hear about all these people arguing and it takes years to get here. So what happens in the middle? What happens to little, you know, Johnny? So the court has the ability to make temporary orders relative to, you know, the care and custody of minor children and support and leveling the playing field, say, with an order for assisting with attorney's fees costs. So we can get some temporary orders in place that will allow us to complete our disclosures, hopefully then determine whether or not there's any disagreement. And if there is, we pursue a way to resolve that. This is what these atros that I talked about look like. Unfortunately, in practice, most people don't read them. So I do like some of my attorneys, as they're going through this paperwork, will have the person in front of them in an initial to make sure that you do understand, so that I'm aware of the ramifications. Okay, so we've done our disclosures. We may have some temporary orders. What happens next? Well, it's really not rocket science. And one of my best friends was a retired judge. She says, "What's the problem they each get have?" Well, that's probably an oversimplification, but if we strip out all of the emotions and we just deal with the business part of it, oftentimes really isn't that complicated. So we talk about resolving the matter. What's the issue? Each get half. Okay, so we figure out how to do that. What are we going to do with the kids? Okay, we figure that out. Support we'll talk about a little bit later to the extent that that exists. So sometimes it just happens because everybody gets together and says, this is ridiculous. We should just come to an agreement and this is going to be what works best for a family. Okay, step number 2, that doesn't work. So maybe I'm going to offer myself into mediation. The mediation is where you would have a neutral in a confidential setting so that it allows you to participate and provide, like, you know, your best proposal, because the only thing that comes out of mediation is an agreement. If you don't reach an agreement, everything remains confidential. It can't be brought up later on. Very effective. Even in my practice, parties may come in immediately saying we want to mediate, or parties may come in and they can't see themselves this far down, but eventually we get there. Even with, you know, very active cases with lawyers involved, we know we have to find a way out. Because the trial is usually the most devastating and the hardest on the family. You know, calling the witnesses to testify. It's in the county of Los Angeles, it's grossly expensive. It's unpredictable in its results. You know, which side of the bed did the judge wake up on that day? You don't know. There's so many things that are unpredictable. So that's why we'd like to keep control over the outcome a bit more. We can do that in mediation. Other times, we'll actually hire a retired judge to sit as a private judge. Okay, not everybody can afford that, but the benefit for those that can is, instead of, for example, one of the cases that I just wrapped up in trial a number of months ago, only took 11 months for the trial to complete. 11 months. $250,000 for fees for those 11 months of trial. So it's really not the place that you want to be. If it becomes a case that just can't settle, in hiring a private judge, the benefit that you get is the attention of the private judge, and they're typically going to listen to you from like 9 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon and stay focused on your case until they get time. So my friends in that arena basically say, in their experience, private judging saves parties money. And I would agree if the case is gonna be one that's gonna be heavily litigated or move its way to trial. Okay, so parentage, this is the old paternity. We're way past biology when it comes to parentage these days. So there's a couple of ways, a number of ways of establishing a parental relationship. And then a few ways to have it legitimized, in other words, for the law to recognize the parental relationship. And the first one is basically at the hospital is signing a voluntary declaration of parentage that has the same effect as we call a judgment of parentage. So that would make the other person, typically the father, going to be the second parent. So if we have that or don't have that, we may or have some disagreements related to the care, custody of the children or support, we need a way to get into court. So the way that we get in is we file, again, a petition to determine the parental relationship. Even with the VDOP, what we do is check the box that says we have a VDOP, and then we just move on to the custody and support issues. But if you don't have that, you can establish yourself as a parent. So how do you be a parent? Took the child into my home, raised him as my own, held him out as my own, don't know anybody else that's there. So this is where socio relationships can trump biological relationships. And we have a few different things. The law is constantly shifting to put greater and greater weight into this socio relationship as being the real bond between a parent and a child. California's gone as far as allowing for more than two parents. I haven't had any of those cases, but I'm aware of them. Family formation is also pretty interesting. We do have one presumption that remains, and that's if a married woman gives birth to a child and her husband isn't sterile or infertile, it is conclusively presumed to be a husband's child. That's intended to protect the integrity of the family unit. So Joe can go and get his DNA test. It doesn't matter. It's a conclusive presumption. You can't get around it. Bob, who's like, really? The child isn't mine, has 2 years. So I've had those cases where I had a client with 3 children. He was concerned about the last one. So he took them all to get tested. We found out the last one was his. First 2 were, but legally they were his because it's 2 years. Okay, even in parentage actions, we can also get our temporary orders and then moving on to our final orders regarding custody visitations. Oh, keep one. Okay, child custody. This is a hard one. Basically, we're looking at what's in the best interest of the child, but there's some things that we have to consider. One of the things that we consider is that frequent and continuing contact with both parents is going to be in the best interest of the child. We want to look at providing for their health and welfare as being significant. And then the things that will significantly interrupt it would be introducing a concept of domestic violence, which is not predicated on violence. It's predicated on a legal term called abuse, which could be as basic as disturbing one's peace, scrolling through your telephone, hiding the car keys, having you followed, disturbing your peace. So when that gets introduced into the case, there's some presumptions that arise in the law that say it's not a good idea to force the abused parent to co-parent openly with an abuser. There are some ways for the found abuser To rebut that presumption over a period of time, typically there's classes and rehabilitation type of therapy to get back in. Any other things with the habitual abuse of legal substances, alcohol being number one, or the use of illegal substances, which could be, detrimental to the kids and usually cause some degree of neglect, if not greater physical harm. We do not have a presumption that each parent gets 50-50. Doesn't exist. We're supposed to build it from the bottom up, but in the 40 years that I've been doing this, there's a lot of pressure with just as much as what's the problem, they each get half. What's the problem? Why can't Johnny, live with both of you? So we do see that happening a lot. Most often with fit parents. You have an unfit parent, that's going to change. But the reality is we're supposed to go from the bottom up and building it. Another thing that we don't have is called a tender years doctrine. What does that mean? It means the day the baby comes out of the hospital, dad occupies the same legal rights as mom for custody. Guess what? Almost never happens. Typically, we still follow that mom is probably more of the nurture, taking care of the infant. So we still have to recognize those things. And the reality is when somebody goes into court, the first thing that we're looking at, well, what did you guys do for the last year or months that have been around? Who has been caring for the child? So we want to provide for consistency, stability, and to promote healthy attachments and not, destroy them, because that can cause some severe problems for the child later on. Two different types of custody. Physical is like the residential plan, the parenting plan where they're going to live. Legal is making decisions about health, education, and welfare. Almost all parents are going to share joint legal, except if there's a reason not to, and that could be because of an issue of domestic violence, or it could be that the court decides, I don't like the anti-vax parent, so I'm going to give the other parent sole legal custody over healthcare decisions. So they can break it down as well. So we went over this, best interest, we can continue with contact. Sole custody has the other parent has no rights. Parents are entitled, that's a big word. It's entitled, it's yours to frequently continue in contact with your minor children until you're stripped of that. That'll typically happen in the juvenile court in that type of setting. So that comes into play in some tough cases. Dad finishes his prison sentence, burns off his 6-year parole, no contact with the daughter. The daughter is now a blood cancer survivor, and dad petitions the court to say, I want to be able to build a relationship with my minor daughter. Courts, well, you're entitled to frequent and continuing contact. This is a real case that I had. So they order visitations. We go back. I then come into the case. We go to the oncological team and we find out that there's a direct correlation between stress and the cancer flaring up again. We go back to the judge, basically talking about how the child is reacting to this, the shame and embarrassment we have, the parent hasn't been around for a while. And Your Honor, if you continue this order, you may very well kill this child. Okay, so what to do at that point? He appoints what's called minors counsel, who confirms what we said. And that's probably the only case where I've had a parent who had absolutely no chance of forming a relationship with the child. She's just gonna, I'm sure she's aged out by now, and she does whatever it is that she wants to do. But this can be a real bear in some cases where somebody's disappeared for a period of time and then we come back. Okay. Why you're here, or your status as documented or not, has nothing to do with this. If anything, it's just gonna get a judge upset. The only time that's gonna come in, we must consider it when we have abduction threats. There's some instances where there's countries that are more difficult to get the children out of, so we will talk about it with that. In abduction threats, one of the things the court has to consider is the parent, the potential abductor, their roots in the community in context. So if they're undocumented, that's something that's going to be used against them to say, well, they're not documented here, and we're going to increase the risk that they're going to run away with kids. Okay. So this is what I was talking about. Domestic violence. The presumption comes up under this code section 3044, and it isn't limited to criminal convictions. If the court finds that one parent has been abusive, it's going to trigger 3044, so that the court is not to award joint custody, but the abuser can rebut the presumption by indicating that, you know, they've improved themselves. Okay. Types of orders regarding visitation. It can be broken down into a schedule that, you know, these days. Reasonable visitation, which if anybody has a provision like that, it's unenforceable because nobody knows what reasonable is. Without having particular dates, it can't be enforced. Then we have monitored or supervised visitation, where that's the setting where we can make it safe that Johnny's not going to be abducted, Johnny's not going to be abused, Johnny's not going to be exposed to inappropriate comments that would hurt him. And the hardest is no visitation, but sometimes that happens in early stages, particularly in domestic violence, because one of the boxes that you can check on the forms is no contact. So at least for the period of 21 to 25 days, there may be no contact with the minor children. Domestic violence can take a long time to make its way through the court, so that 21 to 25 days may turn into months. But the kids will be there. Obviously, as the child gets older, the more at ease the court is, because the child can tell you what's going on or be able to report things. We do look at the health of the child, particularly I see cases where somebody may be in denial about the special needs of the child. And that's not going to be in the child's best interest. So a parent who is more responsive to say that, okay, my child isn't necessarily perfect and has these needs, but we know that that parent's probably going to tend to the needs better. The ability of parents to care. Ties, that has more to do with the concept of one parent to this very mobile society saying, I'm moving. And those are very difficult cases as well, because we have to treat the move as actually happening. So as we're evaluating it, some moms now live in Minnesota. What's the best plan for the kids? Okay. There's all different ways of trying to make things safe for the kids. Usually the easiest, even in simple divorces, until the parties can really come to grips with their feelings, their emotions. School exchanges are the best. You take them to school on Monday, dad picks them up from school Wednesday, takes them back to school, you pick them up again on Friday, and try to have all of your exchanges focused in school so the parents don't have to get together. Works with daycare as well, sometimes other family members. Curbside exchange is basically where a child's old enough that you just drive over to the other parent's house, you park your car, let the child get out, watch the child go in, and then you go. So what we try to do is minimize the time that the two parents are together, where they might act inappropriately, do something inappropriate, and in front of the child, which is very damaging. I did this. my son was in grade school, maybe fourth grade. And I don't know if I was gonna do it. But I'm taking him to school, he's in the backseat of the car, he said something about his mom. He said, Dad, that hurts my feelings. It does. It hurts them very deeply. That's part of their genetic makeup. And even with parents who aren't the best, the child has a tendency of looking at the best in them and believing that that parent can be the best.
What I've heard a lot of times is that children actually feel sometimes that if they've done something wrong, caused this.
Very frequently, they're very confused. You know, you know, just look at what we're exposed to, you know, happily ever after and all of these different things that just don't work out all that well in the real world. So it's to an extent easier for them now than it used to be. Like when I got my divorce, I'm an Irish Catholic, I had 86 first cousins. I was the second one to get a divorce. I was so ashamed that my wife filed because I never would have. It's like, you don't do that. Can't do that. So as it is now, typically the children are going to see others, but they do believe that they are a catalyst for the disputes and fighting between the parents and that they have things, you know, that they're part of the reason for the break. And then they try to correct the conduct. Is there anything they can do? It's a tough situation, but the good news is, at least the science says children are resilient. The best predictor of their future success is the ability of the parents to avoid conflict. So I do that all the time. Leading into Christmas, you want to give your kid a good Christmas gift, get your case finished. Get this thing behind you. That's what your child wants. Okay, support. So child support in all 50 states now is calculated by a mathematical formula. It's called guideline. And it's the feds that made us do this because, you know, the feds put a lot of money into the states for child support and child care. California's, okay, this is the fear disobedience. So there are a number of programs that are out there that can be used to calculate child support. It's fairly complicated. And the drivers are the parents' net income, the custodial arrangement, in other words, the amount of time in care of the low-time parent, and then some specialized expenses, particularly cost of health insurance. The care we want people to be insured. So this formula gets applied, and much as Teresa was doing, you can see we have all of these different categories that can come in. And when we have different income categories, it's because different income sources can be taxed at different rates. So every one of these things is a drop-down menu, and it'll give us more inputs. New spouse income, well, the new spouse is not responsible to support your kids, but you may file jointly with your new spouse, and that may affect your taxes. So what this program is doing behind the screen, it's doing a tax return. It's calculating what the exact taxes are going to be for the family. And then basically the other expenses that we're looking here are things that would raise your net income because they're tax deductions. Just as an illustration, for this family, I can't see what the timeshare is, but we had a question regarding who gets the dependency exemption. And this basically shows you how that's put into the calculation. And since this spouse has head of household, they're given the 3 exemptions. What that does is, Teresa says, raises your standard deduction. It could give you some kitty tax rebates. So it increases your net income. The net result here is the amount of support because mom has head of household, then that deductions likely has gone down. The computer is analyzing a proposal, and in this case, it's considering releasing those two exemptions to father that the family unit may save taxes, although mom would wind up with less support, could be more net spendable income for the family. So this is the program that every judge in the county of Los Angeles uses, other than child support courts, because they use the state written program. Child support courts are, when the Department of Child Support Services is the one that's going in, making an order, enforcing the order. That's all available for parents for free. Again, the idea of our children receiving adequate support is a big deal. So we have a lot of resources. This program also touches upon a concept of spousal support. There's two types of spousal support. One is temporary. The temporary spousal support is intended to maintain status quo. So that's how do we try to keep the family on their cash flow basis as close as possible to where they were before the separation. So, although I can change this to Los Angeles has always used Santa Clara's formula for the last 60 years. So in here, it doesn't result in a payment. And that's really because after all things considered, their net incomes are not too dissimilar. And after debt-based child support, there's really not going to be any disparity. The second type of spousal support is the support that's awarded at the end of the case. And that's based upon a little bit more than a dozen specific factors in the code, some of which don't speak of math, history of domestic violence, periods of time, tending to domestic duties, balancing hardships. But the theory behind it is that if you consider all of these things, that a judge can reach up into the ether and divine a number, and that'd be the number. The reality is that's about as much predictability as we have when we come to it. When we go to settlement conferences and things like that, we'll typically look at the temporary number and reduce it by like 20 to 25% because we're shifting from maintaining a status quo to what is society think is an appropriate payment for a former spouse to make to their former spouse. Okay, this is what the readout looks like with our results in the middle inputs. Okay. Support orders remain in effect unless or until they terminate by operation of law. Little Johnny's graduated high school, has reached the age of 18. Another reason. But circumstances can change. People lose jobs, people get better jobs. So we can modify support orders based upon the change. Children are always supposed to be able to be supported consistent with the lifestyle of their parents. So the one thing that I advise here is that if there has been a change, don't wait, because we can't go backwards unless you go to prison. Let's hope that nobody's doing that because we have a concept called prison credits because you're not working in prison. But other than that, you can't go backwards. So if you're the support paying spouse and you lose your job, you need to modify, you need to raise that question immediately, file papers with the court, because that'll preserve the date which the order could be modified back to. On the other side of things, you become aware that the other parent has received, significant increase, then you would want to go ahead to modify to make sure that the kids also benefit by that increase, because you can't go back to a date earlier than the date that you formally requested the modification to be made. Spousal support's a little bit more complicated, but let's say if the supporting party, the payor, loses their income, they would modify downwards. So spousal support is modifiable as child support. It just has different rules when somebody's trying to make the spousal support go up. Because we have the concept of a narrow standard of living, and if somebody has a windfall that has no bearing on narrow standard, I'll give you a real case. Represented this guy who was married for a couple of years. During those 2 years, he made about $30,000 a year. They went their separate ways. The divorce followed like 12 years later. At that point, he was making a lot of money. In the software industry, he was making 7 figures a year. So throwing that number into this calculation, we have this support at like $40,000 a month, more than he made in a year during the marriage. So we have a cap. There it is, cap that had a marital standard of living. It's inappropriate for it to go further than that. Okay, here's our resources. To get along with the kids, Los Angeles Superior Court has a number of resources. One is they'll help you put together a parenting plan. The other is they have social workers and mental health workers that will help you put together a parenting plan. They also have programs for high conflict parents to try to teach them co-parenting skills. These 2 applications are private. And what they do is allow for the parents to communicate with one another regarding the child's plans. You know, things that pop up during the baseball game, he needs to get to the practice, he needs his away jersey. I like our family wizard because it has this little addition called the tone meter. And the tone meter is actually going to say when the tone of what you're writing is now becoming inappropriate, so that you can take that out. Listen, the whole point of communicating, we hope, is to be heard, not to attack. So, you know, you try to make sure that your communications are such a way that they can be received. Let's face it, what you want what you want. So most of the time to get it, you know, be sweet, go that route. It's a lot more likely that you're going to be able to communicate rather than saying, you idiot, once again. That's usually just going to cause people to settle in their position. Okay. LA County, all the counties, we have a lot of money invested in what are called the self-help clinics. They're very good, they're very bright, vibrant. The only thing I have to do in a lot of instances, let's say I let somebody come and talk to me. What's happening is I'm assessing the legal issues that may be in their case, and I'm assessing their ability to be one of the 70% of the people who are referred to as self-represented litigants. In other words, can they do it? Do they have the intellectual capacity? Do they have performance? Is something that's within their wheelhouse to be able to do? Because personally, for me, I don't want to be in any case that I can't make a better bottom line. So if I can't find value for myself, what I want to do is direct the clients to another type of resource so that their bottom line remains the best it can be. Self-help is good. Mediation. Love it. Even in my highly contested cases, we always try to drive it there. Why? Better control. Less money. Eventually it's going to end. And there's 2 ways that it ends. One is earlier, and you stop the bleed. And the other is when all the money is gone, the attorneys have all the equity in the houses, and there's nothing left. Your attorney leaves, their attorney leaves, and there's nothing left to fight over because it's been spent. So we don't want to go that route. So we want to find an alley. Access to lawyers. 2 local bar associations, San Fernando Valley Bar Association, Los Angeles County Bar Association. They will vet the attorneys to make sure that they have adequate credentials, and they will either talk to you for free for a very low cost, at least for a consultation.
Well, here in Santa Maria, which one are we in?
Both. You can have access to both. There may be more attorneys signed up for San Fernando Valley. But Blackfoot is a bigger, San Fernando is an affiliate of it, so like, for me, this is my big bar. So I would try both. Otherwise, legal resources, they're very slim to none. I mean, you can check with me, we probably have some resources on our website. If not, my friend at Feinberg Waller lists all of the resources there, you know, legal services. We have some private law firms like Quinn that I donate to, Parent UI, Neighborhood Legal Services. There's many resources, so you're never really going to be alone. You know, you look, but there's a lot of demand for those resources. There is no public money. So a place like Lebanon exists because myself and other people think that's a good community service, and we give them money to hire attorneys to represent people. Questions? That is the end. You're all experts now.
Hold on one more, because we can't read your information, we can see it up there. Oh, cool. I'll see you back here.
Obviously, that's the pre-pandemic day. That's like 60 pounds ago. But I could tell it was age because the first slide said 35 years. I'm 40 years into this now. Okay, any
I have a
questions?
question.
Sure.
What's the legal, age for a child to decide which parent wants to stay? Because
Okay, 18.
18?
18.
What can this?
18.
Okay.
Let me go a little bit further. If a child is old enough to have the capacity to reason, and the child is expressing a preference, the court must consider the preference. A young child's preference may not be a good idea. An older child's preference may not be a good idea. So the court will act as an intermediary. By the time the child reaches 14 years of age, that child not only would their express preference have to be considered, they have a right to address the court. That doesn't mean that they go talk to the judge, but the court will facilitate a way to find out what that child wants to say. And again, when we're dealing with the older children, if we're talking about good kids, they're basically going to get to do what they want to do. And have the conversation a lot. We've got a 17-year-old, you know, running certain athletic programs, have been on like a 50-50 schedule of some type. You know, typically the last one was a week on, week off. And it's sort of like, you know, it's just easier for me to have one home base, and the parent feels secure enough, like the kid still loves them. The parents have a tendency of working it out and respecting the child's wishes. The court would respect the child's wishes, but they don't get ultimate decision-making ability until they're 18. Yes.
We have a question on Zoom.
Okay.
Could you let us know the average cost of mediation?
Depends on what you do to get there, but if you start at mediation, none of these prices are fixed. So my suggestion is that you would call around to a number of places. I would think at a minimum, you're going to be looking at $2,000 to $10,000. Again, there's no set on this, so you call around. It has to do, you know, mediators don't even have to be lawyers. Mediators don't have to be judges. Mediators, I've been in mediation this week. One happens to be a lawyer, the other one happens to be a paralegal, and they co-mediate. And it has to do with how long did it take you to get there. In some of my cases, that could be, well, that was $100,000 ago. You know, it's the earlier you can get there in the right type of cases, the best. It's not suitable for all cases, certainly not going to be suitable for domestic violence cases. It's not going to be suitable in most instances where, you know, you have somebody who's hell-bent on causing financial harm. Unfortunately, they're more difficult. They don't mediate as easily. And they just cost more.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes,
What if a person already has an order from foreign court? I mean, I'm not a citizen of the United States. My kids are citizens of the United States.
Mhm.
Their father is also not a citizen.
Okay.
But we were living for quite a long time in another country. And I had to move here, and I already have the court order from that country where we were living.
Mhm.
So what I'm gonna do with it here, I know that it Geneva Convention, it works here, and I already have everything translated and, like that.
so we have the Hague Convention on International Abduction of Children. Most progressive thinking nations are signatories to it. We just got Japan in there in the last 2-3 years. So what we have is the same type of respect and comedy of orders and respecting of the orders. So you would take your order, get it registered here. And then one would have to determine at that point if dad is in country of origin. I think under the Hague Convention, that original country would continue to have jurisdiction over modification unless they relinquish it to the United States. And they, under the Hague, is called country of habitual residence, or interstate here, and we talk about something called home state. But you're well on your way to registering things here. And that's our starting place is, you know, those orders would be respected here, but now because of the distance, they may not be correct.
I have some fears because there was a history of domestic violence that I couldn't prove. But finally, we finished all that in another country. And now I have a fear when he comes here, he can kidnap the children or take them somewhere without my permission, without telling me or something, because it happened many times.
Okay.
So my fear, what should I do to prevent that? Like, can I limit him crossing the border with the children? So can I call the police and show them the order from another country or something?
That'd be difficult. I think they would be stymied by that. But what you can do is register your order here, so follow the provisions in the Hague Treaty to register here. Then you want to put the kids' passports and their identities to be identified with the State Department. So whether they're leaving the country on their US citizen passports or the country of origin passports, that they could be flagged and prevented from leaving the country. Can you get other orders here? That has to do with whether or not, let's say California takes up custody jurisdiction to modify, or if you need to go back to country of origin for modification. And what happens when you register here is it's registered for enforcement, but not necessarily for modification.
I'm going to have to interrupt right now because those of you who have children should go get them and bring them in here because we have some other things to do and we can continue now. But the child care leave at 12:30. And they can eat snacks back there too. I'm sure they're little hunger bugs.
They've been out there playing.
Telling them that they're.
All right, any more questions?
Just to follow up on that.
Sure.
Can you not file for some type of restraining order under these circumstances?
It gets, well, so we have a person residing in another country, so the question is, you know, how do we exercise our jurisdiction over it? Yes, if he does something here, we can get restraining orders, and we can revisit parenting plans and restraining orders, even under a concept. The Hague probably has a comparable to what we call a temporary emergency jurisdiction, like California enacted some strong legislation favoring children's access to services here for you know, sexual identity, transgendering, where we can literally have kids come from a state that won't provide them the services, come to California, we'll exercise temporary emergency jurisdiction. to make sure that the child can get the care and treatment.
When you answered your question, I heard you answer it, but I was trying to like articulate how would I actually implement what you're saying? So step one would be with filing.
Registration. So she has orders from the country.
Registering the orders here.
So she's going through the process, of having them translated in a certified way. And then she's gonna follow the process in the Hague as to the Hague Treaty, as to how to have those orders entered here for enforcement.
Interesting.
So any more questions?
But yeah, that does sound really overwhelming.
It can be overwhelming, but we've had some, like, I remember giving one of my associates an induction, international inductive, and that's where Hague can come in again, because we're a country of habitual residents, we want to return the children. And she's like, oh my God, and she's a lawyer, like, oh, but the State Department wants. And so with that, we were able to obtain the recovery of the children from the foreign country.
So when you start with that process, you've done like documents you can download online or?
Yeah, you do the investigation sometimes through the State Department. I would call some of the legal service agencies that they brought up will be suited for this because those type of issues impact the poorer of Californians. So they have a lot of experience with it.
You have low cost attorney resources for immigration, not for.
There's some, it's hard because there's really no public source of funds.
Is there a volunteer network?
Yeah, there usually is, like, I was asked this week by Hague Council to take a pro bono case person, like, I'm just too busy, I need to hire attorneys, I'm just personally too busy, I can't do it. So that we're out there, it's just hard to find. I found one of my friends, one of my attorneys was out fishing, and he had some Mexican nationals who were interested in the immigration process. I immediately got online. I found a free workshop at San Diego run by attorneys. So it starts with doing the look. It's surprising sometimes how easy it is. Yeah.
Do you have lower cost for seniors?
No.
No. Can I say something about that? Aesthetic?
That's it. Yeah.
That would be where you would go. Aesthetic does free legal.
What is that?
Aesthetic is a law office in LA that works with seniors. They work with the same thing.
I just saw that.
It's kind of how people didn't look it up. So I just know that family, that is it for God.
Well, thank you all. Thanks for your attention. That's it.
Your evaluation.